We get this question a lot because people who live in big cities often say, well, it seems like strong towns is for small towns. And then we get people in small towns who will say, well, it seems like all you guys talk about are big cities. I do think that the core insight is a really good one, because the way change happens in systems is very different when you're talking a large kind of top-down oriented system and a very bottom-up one. I think we can see in cities like, and this is not, I'm not going to paint a happy picture for you here, in cities like Detroit and Memphis, which are major US cities. I mean, these are in the top, 100 cities in terms of population and size and capacity in the US. What we see is that strong towns ideas come to the fore in two ways. Number one, in the absence of competent and effective government, which you do get an absence of that when you're broke. I mean, that the part of the good governance kind of aspect of strong towns is that a prerequisite for doing good is that we have to be financially solvent. When you become financially insolvent and you can't do the things that people expect, things start to break down. And what we see then is that people start to step into that void and do those things themselves, make the best of things, and in some ways do things that are truly beautiful. I mean, we've seen examples in Detroit and in Memphis of people taking matters into their own hands, working with their neighbors to fix up a corner, fix up a block, fix up a neighborhood, do things to slow cars down, do things to make the neighborhood more livable, more beautiful, clean up the park, do all kinds of things. Those things happen when governments fall apart. And I wish, I'm not pining for that for places, but I do think that that is one of the ways this manifests. I think the other one is, and we can be maybe a little bit more optimistic about this one. I think places, and I'll point to New York as being a leader in this, although Seattle, Los Angeles, and not so much Chicago, but I have seen, inklings of it there, have embraced the idea of prototyping, so tactical urbanism, as a way to make change that they've otherwise found difficult to make. The famous one, of course, is Times Square in New York. Jeanette Sadik-Khan wrote about it in her book Street Fight, and it's really, really good. But you see this, and I think Mike Lydon's book Tactical Urbanism, Mike Lydon and Tony Harris put that book together. A lot of their examples come from Miami. They come from some larger cities, and this is an example of these top-down systems kind of taking the boot off the neck, so to speak, and allowing that kind of block level messiness to happen as a way to learn and scale up. I'm fine with that. Like I think that as a way to start, it's a really good way for those systems to start, is to make room for that. And I think over time, what we hopefully see is that that good bottom-up stuff, that prototyping, starts to crowd out the other stuff, particularly as the money gets tighter and gets more difficult and gets more localized. Andrew, you have something to follow up on that?
I do. I'm glad you called on me. I was just going to say, the other thing to understand is that incrementalism is really key. And at Strong Towns, we talk about this a lot. And what we should understand is that even though we might wish for an entire system to change, sometimes like the whole system changing is probably not possible, but sometimes very tiny changes that are possible have a disproportionate impact on outcomes. And the best widespread example of that right now is parking reform, where we see many cities that are dropping parking minimums. On the one hand, that change is so small that it can generally be done with a simple council vote. But on the other hand, the impact that has on our built environment and all the ramifications around that is tremendous. So I think it's important to think when you're faced with an overwhelming system in terms of points of leverage and what are the small changes that are possible that could have big secondary effects. And then I'd say the final piece of that is just patience. Like, these things take time, and we have to be in it for the long haul and recognize that even though it may not be what we would wish for if we had a magic wand, that, you know, if a city does make good decisions, little small decisions, bit by bit over the decades, that makes all the difference. That's how we got into this. And we should expect that it's going to be how we're going to get out of it as well.
Here's the problem with having Andrew here, is that him and I could talk back and forth on every one of these things for the whole hour. You brought something up, and I wanna key on it. Ta-Nehisi Coates, and not to argue with you, not to push back on you, but I do think there's some nuance. Ta-Nehisi Coates said something along the lines of, the system change you want, the like phase change you want, is not going to happen automatically. Like you're if you're trying to like overthrow the whole system, you need to work incrementally. You need to work, and as you described, Andrew, you can get these changes. But every now and then the system does turn itself over. It does, in a sense, reach what Malcolm Gladwell called like the tipping point, and you throw out one and you replace it with another. And in order for us to be that thing that replaces the system, you have to actually be viable at the incremental scale. You actually have to have enough prototypes and workings to say, oh yeah, that makes way more sense. Let's stop doing this. So I don't think we should say complete systems change or bust, but I think we should be prepared. We should be doing really good work and then prepared for that when I think it will inevitably happen.